The unwelcome passenger, Marcus Kane, wiped grease from his hands as he emerged from the engine bay of the cargo hauler Stellar Drift. The ship groaned like an old man's bones, held together by spare parts and stubborn human engineering. 3 years of running supplies between frontier colonies had taught him that the universe had a twisted sense of humor, but today's joke was particularly cruel. Standing in his cargo bay was a Zephyrian warrior, 7 feet of crystalline blue skin and predatory. Grace. Her name was Vexara, and she radiated the kind of dangerous beauty that made smart men run and foolish ones linger. Her 4 arms moved with liquid precision as she inspected his cargo manifest, each limb ending in claws that could shred titanium. The bone ridges that crowned her skull caught the overhead lights like a natural tiara, while her solid black eyes missed nothing. "Your ship is inadequate," she declared, her voice carrying the musical tones typical of her species, though hers held notes of barely contained violence. "The engines are outdated, the hull plating is thin, and your defensive systems are laughable." Marcus leaned against a crate, studying her with the casual interest of a man who'd learned to appreciate dangerous things. "Well, she's not much to look at, but she's got it where it counts. Made a lot of special modifications myself." Vexara's head tilted, a gesture that somehow managed to be both curious and threatening. Her people were known throughout the galaxy as the fiercest warriors, hired as bodyguards and mercenaries by those who could afford their services. They were also known for their complete inability to understand human humor. "You speak strangely. Human, your words lack precision." "Marcus," he corrected, extending a hand she ignored. "And precision's overrated. Sometimes you gotta wing it." The Zephyrian's ridge-crowned brow furrowed as she processed this concept. She had been assigned to protect a diplomatic envoy traveling to the neutral zone, but mechanical failures had stranded her on the backwater station where Marcus hauled freight. Her government had commandeered his ship, much to his financial dismay and personal intrigue. "This winging it philosophy explains the condition of your vessel," she observed, running one clawed finger along a patch-welded seam. "How do you survive with such careless methods?" Marcus chuckled, the sound echoing in the cavernous hold. "Survive? Lady, humans have been surviving on luck, stubbornness, and creative problem-solving since we crawled out of caves. We're pretty good at it." Something flickered in those obsidian eyes, perhaps curiosity or maybe just confusion. Zephyrians planned everything with mathematical precision, their society built on rigid hierarchies and calculated strategies. The concept of improvisation was as foreign to them as their warrior culture was to most humans. "Your species is illogical," she stated, though her tone had shifted slightly, less harsh judgment and more genuine puzzlement. "Maybe," Marcus agreed, moving to check the atmospheric recycler that had been acting up. "But we're also unpredictable. That's gotta count for something." As he worked, he caught her watching him with those unreadable eyes, and he wondered if he was about to discover just how unpredictable humans could be when faced with 7 feet of alien warrior who could probably tear him in half without breaking. Stride. The universe's sense of humor was about to get a lot more twisted. The art of human charm. The Stellar Drift hummed through jump space while Marcus prepared their evening meal. If you could call rehydrated protein paste and synthetic vegetables a meal. Vexara sat at the small galley table, her forearms folded in what he'd learned was her thinking position. She'd been unusually quiet since they'd departed the station 6 hours ago. "You know," Marcus said, sliding a tray across to her, "most passengers at least try to make conversation. Helps pass the time." "I am not a passenger," she corrected, examining the food with visible suspicion. "I am a warrior in transit. There is a difference." "Right. My mistake." He settled across from her, noting how she had to hunch slightly to fit at the human-sized table. "So, warrior in transit, what's your story? Besides the obvious trained killer angle?" Vexara's head snapped up, those black eyes fixing on him with laser intensity. "You mock me." "Actually, I'm trying to be friendly. Humans do this thing called getting to know each other. Revolutionary concept, I know." She studied him for a long moment, and he found himself wondering what thoughts moved behind that crystalline blue face. Zephyrian expressions were subtle, requiring careful observation to interpret. Her ridge crown flexed slightly, which he'd noticed happened when she was processing something unexpected. "Your species fascinates and confuses our scholars," she said finally. "You achieve impossible victories through methods that should not work. Our military studies human tactics extensively." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's so. What's the conclusion?" "That humans are either incredibly lucky or incredibly stupid, and our scholars cannot determine which." He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to startle her. "Why not both? We've turned stupidity into an art form. Sometimes the dumbest plan is the smartest because nobody expects it." "Illogical," she murmured, but her tone held less conviction than before. "Everything's illogical until it works. Then it's genius." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "You know, for a ruthless warrior, you've got beautiful eyes." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vexara's ridge crown flared wide, her crystalline skin shifting to a deeper blue that pulsed with what looked like embarrassment or anger. All four of her hands slammed onto the table simultaneously, the impact making their meal trays jump. "You dare," she began, then stopped, her expression cycling through confusion, outrage, and something else he couldn't identify. "Easy there, gorgeous." It was a compliment. Gorgeous? She pronounced the word like it might bite her. "You apply aesthetic terminology to a warrior?" "I apply aesthetic terminology to anything that deserves it. And those eyes of yours could stop traffic on a busy hyperspace lane." The blue of her skin deepened further, and Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. A flustered Zephyrian warrior. Her four arms gestured helplessly as she struggled with concepts her culture had never prepared her for. "This is inappropriate," she finally managed. "Warriors are not beautiful. We are functional, deadly. We serve purpose." "Says who? Can't you be deadly and beautiful? Seems like a waste to pick just one." She stared at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize as uniquely Zephyrian bewilderment. Her people had spent so long perfecting the art of war that they'd forgotten the art of being anything else. Marcus found himself oddly touched by her confusion. "Besides," he added with a grin, "I bet you could kill me 6 different ways before." I finished this sentence, and somehow that just makes the compliment more sincere. For the first time since he'd met her, Vexara was completely speechless. When warriors blush, the proximity alarms shrieked through the stellar drift like mechanical banshees, jolting Marcus from his maintenance work on the navigation array. Red warning lights bathed the cramped bridge in hellish crimson as he slid into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing across familiar controls. 3 ships, he muttered, reading the scanner display. "Corvin raiders by the look of them. Well, that's just perfect." Vexara appeared beside him with fluid grace, her warrior instincts having brought her to the bridge the moment the alarms sounded. She studied the tactical display with professional interest, her 4 arms moving in precise gestures as she calculated angles and vectors. "Corvin assault ships," she confirmed. "Fast, lightly armored, designed for hit-and-run attacks. On cargo vessels, standard pirate tactics." Marcus began evasive maneuvers, the stellar drift responding sluggishly to his commands. "Any brilliant warrior strategies for getting out of this mess?" "Surrender would be logical," she replied matter-of-factly. "Corvins typically spare crews who offer no resistance. The cargo is more valuable to them than corpses." "Yeah, well, there's a problem with that plan." Marcus threw the ship into a spiraling dive that made the hull plates groan in protest. "This is my ship, my cargo, and my life. Humans have this quirk, where we don't like giving up our stuff to pirates." Illogical pride will accomplish nothing but death. Maybe, but we'll go down swinging, and sometimes that makes all the difference. The first energy blast scorched past their starboard side, close enough to make the ship's sensors scream warnings. Marcus pushed the engines harder, coaxing every erg of power from the ancient fusion core. The stellar drift might not look like much, but he'd modified her systems with typical human ingenuity, adding redundancies and jury-rigged improvements that no alien engineer would consider practical. Your ship should not be capable of these maneuvers, Vexara observed. One clawed, hand gripping the nearest support strut as Marcus threw them into another impossible turn. The structural stress should have torn the hull apart. That's the beautiful thing about human engineering, he replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to keep them ahead of their pursuers. We build things to break, then we fix them stronger than before. Every repair teaches us something new. Another blast, this one close enough to overload the port shields. Sparks cascaded from control panels as systems struggled to compensate. Marcus rerouted power through backup. Circuits he'd installed during quiet moments in deep space, his modifications proving their worth under fire. Fascinating, Vexara murmured, and he caught something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of skill she hadn't expected to find in a mere cargo hauler. You think this is fascinating? Watch this. Marcus killed the main engines and fired the maneuvering thrusters in a pattern that sent the ship into a controlled tumble. The Corvin raiders overshot their position, suddenly finding themselves in front of their quarry instead of behind. Impossible, Vexara breathed, her obsidian eyes wide with something approaching amazement. No, Marcus corrected, bringing the engines back online and changing course toward the nearest jump point. Just creative problem-solving with a healthy dose of reckless stupidity. As they escaped into hyperspace, leaving the confused pirates behind, Vexara turned to study him with new intensity. Your people continue to surprise me, Marcus Kane. The way she said his name with that musical Zephyrian accent wrapping around the human syllables made something warm flutter in his chest. Good, he replied. I'd hate to be predictable. Her ridge crown flexed in what he was learning to recognize as amusement, and for a moment the deadly warrior seemed almost approachable, almost human, in her own alien way. The revelation of hearts, stellar drift drifted in the shadow of a rogue asteroid, her systems powered down to minimal levels, while Marcus ran diagnostics on the damage from their encounter with the Corvin raiders. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the corridors, as Vexara found him in the engineering section, surrounded by exposed circuitry and diagnostic displays. The primary sensor array requires replacement, she reported, her forearms gesturing at the damage assessment on her datapad. The port shield generator is operating at 60% efficiency, and the hull breach near Cargo Bay 3 needs immediate attention. Marcus looked up from the quantum flux regulator he'd been examining, a streak of coolant fluid marking his cheek. Could be worse. At least we still have atmosphere and artificial gravity. Your optimism in the face of mechanical failure is distinctly human, she observed, settling onto a nearby crate with graceful ease. Most species would consider this situation dire. Most species didn't evolve on a planet that was actively trying to kill them every day, Marcus replied, wiping his hands on a rag. Humans learn early that everything breaks eventually. The trick is making sure you can fix it when it does. Vexara's head tilted in that curious way of hers. Your homeworld was hostile? Earth. Oh yeah. Natural disasters, predators, diseases, climate changes that could wipe out entire species. The planet threw everything it had at us, and somehow we survived by being too stubborn to die and too curious to give up. Something shifted in her expression, a subtle softening around those obsidian eyes. The Zephyrian homeworld is peaceful, perfect. Our ancestors achieved harmony with nature millennia ago, then turned their energies toward perfecting the art of war. Sounds nice, Marcus said, though he caught something wistful in her tone. Must be boring, though. No challenges to overcome, no problems to solve creatively. Boring? She repeated the word as if testing its flavor. I had not considered that perspective. Marcus moved closer, ostensibly to check a damaged relay, but really because he enjoyed her company. What made you become a warrior? Family tradition? All. Zephyrians serve the warrior caste in some capacity. I excelled at combat, so I was selected for advanced training. Her ridge crown flexed slightly. I have never questioned this path. But watching you repair this ship, seeing how you solved the tactical problem with the raiders through pure improvisation, it suggests there are other forms of excellence beyond martial prowess. Marcus paused in his work, struck by the thoughtful quality in her voice. You know, back on Earth, we have a saying, Jack of all trades, master of none. It means someone who knows a little about everything, but isn't an expert at anything specific. This would be considered weakness among my people. Would it? Or would it be strength? He turned to face her fully, tools forgotten. When those pirates attacked, my ship shouldn't have been able to outmaneuver them. But because I understood engineering, piloting, tactics, and a dozen other disciplines, I could find a solution no specialist would have considered. Vexara's 4 arms moved in what he'd learned was a gesture of deep contemplation. You suggest that limitation breeds innovation. I'm suggesting that being a little bit of everything instead of a master of one thing gives you options. Flexibility. The ability to surprise yourself with what you can accomplish. She stood suddenly, moving to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns in her crystalline skin. You surprise me, Marcus Kane. Constantly. Good, he said softly, aware that something important was happening between them. You surprise me too, Vexara. A warrior who thinks deeply, questions her path, and blushes at compliments. Her skin deepened to that darker blue again, and this time she didn't pull away or object to his words. Instead, she reached out with one clawed hand to touch the streak of coolant on his cheek, her touch surprisingly gentle. Perhaps, she said quietly, warriors can be more than just weapons. Perhaps, Marcus agreed, his heart hammering as he realized that somewhere between the pirates and the repairs, something profound had shifted between them. Perhaps they can be partners. When worlds collide, the diplomatic station Harmony Point loomed ahead like a crystalline flower blooming in the void, its multiple sections representing the architectural styles of a dozen species. Marcus guided the stellar drift toward the docking bay with practiced ease, though his attention kept drifting to Vexara as she stood beside him, strangely subdued. You're quiet, he observed as they completed the docking sequence. Having second thoughts about our cargo runs? They'd spent the past 3 days planning a partnership, combining her tactical expertise with his technical skills and knowledge of frontier trade routes. It seemed natural, inevitable even, but now she radiated tension like a coiled spring. My people are here, she said simply, indicating the sleek Zephyrian warship that occupied the station's primary docking bay. The diplomatic envoy I was meant to protect arrived safely through other means. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. So you'll be returning with them. It is expected. My duty is complete, and warriors do not abandon their posts for... She gestured helplessly, struggling with concepts her language had no words for. For adventure? For possibility? For something that might actually make you happy? Her ridge crown flared, and he saw the internal battle playing out across her features. Duty warred with desire, tradition with the tantalizing promise of something new and unprecedented. Happiness is not relevant to a warrior's function, she said. But the words sounded hollow even to her. Says who? Some ancient law written by people who never had to choose between duty and living? Before she could respond, the comm system crackled to life. Vexara of the Blade-Sworn cast, you will report for immediate extraction and debriefing. The voice carried the unmistakable authority of high command, musical Zephyrian tones that brooked no dissent. Vexara's posture straightened automatically. Millennia of conditioning asserting itself. I must go, she said, but her forearms remained motionless at her sides. Must you? Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see his reflection in those obsidian eyes. Or do you choose to? There is no difference. There's all the difference in the universe. Must is about fear and obligation. Choose is about deciding what kind of life you want to live. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could practically see the gears turning in that brilliant mind. Everything she'd been taught, everything she'd believed about duty and purpose, suddenly seemed less certain in the face of alternatives she'd never considered. If I stay, she said slowly, I become an exile, cut off from my people, my culture, everything that defines me. If you stay, Marcus countered, you become free to define yourself, to be more than just what others expect you to be. The calm crackled again, more insistent now. Vexara, respond immediately. She reached for the control, then stopped, her hand hovering over the switch. You would want a partner who has nothing to offer but questions and uncertainty? Marcus smiled, the expression warm and genuine. I'd want a partner who's brave enough to ask those questions, who's strong enough to face uncertainty and smart enough to find answers. Her skin shifted through several shades of blue, emotions playing across her features like aurora. Finally, she pressed the comm switch. But instead of acknowledging the summons, she spoke words that would change everything. Command, this is Vexara. I formally resign my commission, effective immediately. I choose a different path. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, chaos erupted from the comm, as her superiors demanded explanations, threatened consequences, and questioned her sanity. Vexara calmly shut off the transmission and turned to Marcus with something approaching peace in her obsidian eyes. So, she said, her musical voice carrying a note he'd never heard before, hope. Tell me more about this creative problem-solving approach to life. Marcus grinned, already planning their first run to the outer colonies, where human ingenuity and Zephyrian precision could forge something entirely new. First lesson. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody expects, including yourself. As the stellar drift undocked from Harmony Point, leaving behind the rigid certainties of the past for the infinite possibilities of the future, two very different beings discovered that the universe's greatest surprises often came from the courage to choose love over duty, adventure over safety, and partnership over solitude.